Good morning. It is Sunday, September 6, 2020. You can now relax and be informed. Here is your daily bite of news. Germany has come out saying Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was poisoned by a Soviet nerve agent, the same one that was used on a former Russian spy and his daughter in England in 2018. Alexei is in a coma but stable. There is call for a Western response to this attempted assassination, perhaps in the form of sanctions on Russia and its President Putin. In Sweden, the country is doing well against COVID-19 virus despite never having a full lockdown or enforcing mask wearing. Bars are still open and schools are also open. Citizens are not testing high for antibodies in their systems, but are testing high for T-cell counts, showing that they may have built up an immune response in some way to the COVID spread amongst the public. Some factors that may have played a role is their universal healthcare access to all citizens and extensive paid sick leave. Also, 40% were able to work at home. Sweden did pay a high cost in their elderly death count at the start of the COVID spread, despite passing a law to stop visits to elder care homes during the COVID crisis. The first famines of the coronavirus are expected to chronically afflict certain areas such as Yemen, South Sudan, Northeast Nigeria, and the Republic of Congo, according to the United Nations. These areas are vulnerable to acute food deprivation because of chronic armed conflicts and the inability of humanitarian relief providers to distribute aid to them. A monitoring system for assessing hunger emergencies, known as the Integrated Food Security Classification, has an IPC scale for this crisis at Phase 4 in certain areas, the emergency phase. Phase 5 going forward being famine, marked by starvation, death, destitution, and extremely critical levels of malnutrition. Yemen's currency has basically collapsed. Food costs have surged, and drinking water prices have more than doubled since April. The nation's surveillance court found that the FBI had committed widespread violations of rules intended to protect America's privacy. This heavily redacted 83-page ruling about the warrantless surveillance program that was issued in December became public this Friday after it was declassified and posted on the government website. Before the release of the newly declassified court opinion about the 702 program, the Office of the Director grew out of the National Intelligence. John Ratcliffe organized a press briefing with the office chief privacy officer and officials from the F.B.I. and the NSA. The declassified programs grew out of the Stellar Wind Project, a once-secret group of warrantless surveillance and bulk data collection activities that President George W. Bush started under a claim of executive power after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. The December court ruling released on Friday centered on the warrantless wiretapping program, which since 2008 has been governed by a law known as Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act. That law authorizes the government to collect, without a warrant, from American companies like Google and AT&T, the emails and phone calls of non-citizens abroad for foreign intelligence purposes, even when they are communicating with Americans. In the newly disclosed ruling, James Boasberg, the chief judge of the FISA court, signed off on the new annual set of rules, but not before scolding the FBI over many instances in which its analysts had violated a previous set of them. On a more interesting note, 17 billion light-years away from Earth, one black hole with 85 times the mass of the Sun, and a second with 66 solar masses smashed together, creating a black hole 142 times as massive as the Sun. 8 Earth-suns worth of mass and energy disappeared into gravitational waves, ringing in the universe like a bell. Until recently, there have been scant evidence of black holes of intermediate sizes, with 100 to 100,000 solar masses in the arenas known as active galactic nuclei, or AGNs. The black hole created in the GW 190521 merger is the first solid example of this missing link. This is the first firm mass measurement of an intermediate mass black hole at the time of its birth. Now we know reliably at least one way these objects can form through the merger of other black holes. In a Trump support parade on Lake Travis in Texas, with over 2,600 people in attendance, several boats are reported to have sunk. The Travis County Sheriff's Office tweeted that it responded to multiple calls involving boats in distress during the parade. There are no current reports on major injuries or deaths. Pew Research study finds that 52% of young adults in the U.S. are living with their parents. That's the highest share since the Great Depression, according to a 1940 census showing 48% at that time. Pew defines young adults as 18 to 29 years old. The number of young adults living with parents grew to 26.6 million in July, an increase of 2.6 million from February. Meanwhile, at the Kentucky Derby, 2,000 activists demanding justice for the police killing of Breonna Taylor protested Saturday near the 146th Kentucky Derby in Louisville, Kentucky. The Justice and Freedom Coalition, one of several groups organized by the protest, said demonstrators aimed to shift attention from America's most famous horse race to Taylor's case. The eyes of the world are going to be on Louisville, and they are, as they are every year during the Derby. It has been nearly 6 months since Taylor has been murdered, and there have been no justice or any information to come out, said Timothy Finley, a founder of the coalition. Louisville Metro Police Department officers fatally shot Taylor on March 13th while executing a no-knock search warrant at her apartment. Gunfire broke out after her boyfriend fired a warning shot because he thought the officers were intruders. 26-year-old EMT Breonna, who was unarmed, was shot by police in her home. Protesters want the officers involved in her death to be charged. Churchill Downs said in a statement Thursday that the Derby race would be held as planned in the hopes that it could bring the community together. Today, while we honor a Kentucky tradition with the running of the Derby, we remain cognizant of the community's desire for answers in the investigation into the death of Miss Breonna Taylor, said Attorney General Daniel Cameron in a tweet. We know there are some who disagree with our decision to run the Kentucky Derby this year, racetrack official statements assert. We respect that point of view, but make our decision in the belief that traditions can remind us of what binds us together as Americans, even as we seek to acknowledge and repair the terrible pain that rends us apart. So Saturday afternoon, a long line of demonstrators, many carrying guns, marched to downtown Louisville, where they clashed with Black Lives Matter supporters in a shouting match in front of a memorial for Taylor. The group was organized by Dylan Stevens, an online personality who calls himself the Angry Viking and criticizes the Black Lives Matter movement. During a rally before the group marched on to the city, Stevens warned that a civil war is coming. On another note regarding the Derby, since the early 1920s, Derby fans have sung the state song before the start of the big race. It's been called an anti-slavery song, but Amelia Bingham, a Louisville-born historian who is writing a book on the history of the song, says that that is not accurate. The song, it was written by a white man about a black person being sold downriver from Kentucky to the deep south to be sung by white men pretending to be black men on stages for white audiences, Bingham says. Friday, Churchill Downs said the song will still be played this year, but after some discussion they decided to have it performed by a solo bugler following a moment of silence and reflection. Bugler Steve Buttleman did play My Kentucky Home in place of the absent University of Louisville marching band at the Derby. Hannah Drake says that that's not good enough. It still doesn't align with the Derby's statement about empathy and change. She says, we all know the words to the song. You don't play it on a bugle and make it better. There is no way to dress up slavery. So, protesters converged outside Churchill Downs. The demonstrators were peaceful as they circled the historic track. They chanted, "No justice, no Derby," and carried signs imploring people to say Taylor's name. Police watched in riot gear. some on horses, and some with armored military vehicles. But inside the Derby, one would say it's been a roller coaster year, but thankfully it's the love of the horses that keeps me going, says Bob Baffert. They're the best therapy a human can have. I love being around them. Wagering from all sources on the Derby was $79.4 million, compared to the $165 million on last year's race, a bit of a downturn. Churchill Downs officials attribute that decline to the absence of on-track wagering, and also the fact that only 15 horses were on the field to race. Jockey John Velasquez rode his horse Authentic to victory in the 146th running of the Kentucky Derby on Saturday at Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky. Velasquez was one of several jockeys in the race who wore black bands with the phrase, "Equality for All." With a quarter mile to go, horse Tiz the Law, the held favorite for the day, pulled alongside Authentic, and the two hit the top of the stretch together. The horse's Honor AP was fourth, followed by the horse Max Player, who came in fifth. On a lighter note, the Danish toy maker Lego said Wednesday that sales jumped 14% in the first half of 2020 compared to the same period last year. CEO Niels Christensen pointed to investments in e-commerce as crucial during a period in which retail stores were shut. Amazon.com Incorporated is banning the foreign sale of seeds in the United States after thousands of Americans received unsolicited packages of seeds in their mailboxes, postmarked from China. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, in July identified more than a dozen plant species ranging from morning glories to mustard in the bags of seeds. It warned Americans not to plant them, that they could be non-native varieties that would harm the commodity and crops. Moving forward, Amazon says, we are only permitting the sale of seeds by sellers who are based in the U.S. Students were dragged from protests against the contested re-election of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko by masked men who hauled them into vans. Roughly 30 students were detained for taking part in unauthorized protests in Belarus' capital city, according to Minsk police officers. Students wore red and white opposition colors as they protested Lukashenko for the fourth week across the city. Thousands of women reportedly held a separate demonstration later, protesting the arrest of students and shouting, "Hands off the children!" Protests erupted in Belarus following the August 9th presidential election that resulted in the re-election of Lukashenko, who claimed to have won with 80% of the vote and alleged that his opponent, Svetlana, received only 10% of the vote. The European Union has rejected the election results and is considering placing sanctions on Belarus. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also has said that the U.S. and its allies are considering sanctions. Lukashenko rejects all accusations of a rigged election. Reports of severe abuse by those who have been arrested over the last several weeks of demonstrations have emerged once people are released. Dozens of protesters who were arrested have disappeared, along with dozens of journalists. The government has denied any abuse of detainees, but photos of demonstrators released from police custody suggest otherwise. Washington Federal U.S. District Judge Dabney Friedrich, a President Trump appointee, vacated the plan Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos's policy unveiled this summer to divert more of the $16 billion Congress passed in emergency K-12 education funding away from public schools to private schools. The judge found the rule was unlawful and contrary to Congress's intent for the money under the CARES Act legislation. Thus, the department's interim final rule, which conflicts with the unambiguous text of the statute, is void, Friedrich said in her 13-page ruling. The ruling was in response to a lawsuit filed by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. Public school districts, families, and other pro-public school advocates were involved as well. They were concerned that DeVos's rule, which laid out a new formula for allocation of coronavirus funds, would divert resources away from public schools, whose enrollment is majorly non-white. Now local districts will only have to allocate funds to private schools based on the number of students in poverty going to those private schools, as opposed to the total private school population. Thousands of Israelis protested outside the official residence of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Demonstrators have been protesting against Netanyahu's handling of the coronavirus crisis, which has led to soaring unemployment, and believe he should step down while on trial for corruption charges. The country is considering a new lockdown to stop the rapid rise in daily infections, as Israel has more than 26,000 active COVID-19 cases. Protesters held banners reading "Revolution" and "Get out of here," and held blue and white Israeli flags. Smaller crowds gathered on bridges and intersections across the country, also calling for Netanyahu to step down. The demonstrations have been largely peaceful. Netanyahu was dismissed the protesters as leftists and anarchists. He has vowed to remain in office despite being charged last year with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in 3 long-running corruption investigations. He has denied the allegations, calling them a witch hunt and lashing out at the judiciary and media. India passed 4 million reported cases of COVID-19 on Saturday. Since July, India has had the 3rd highest number of confirmed cases of any country, almost as many as the 2nd highest country, Brazil. The U.S. still leads the world with 6.2 million total cases of the virus reported, according to the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Research Center. The Indian government has imposed a strict lockdown in March, but has lifted many restrictions amid economic hardship. President Trump is defending himself against allegations that he has privately disparaged veterans for their military service during his time in office. These allegations are in reference to an article by The Atlantic where Trump was criticized for canceling his appearance at a 2018 ceremony in Belarus, France because of rain, but The Atlantic article said he didn't want to get his hair wet. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden was quick to jump on the current issue, calling Trump's alleged comments disgusting and calling for him to apologize. On Friday, Trump said the White House had documented how the stop was canceled because of weather and that the story was a complete lie. White House officials who were present for some of the incidents described in the article have issued statements disputing the story and pointing to Trump's record on military issues. Critics of President Trump point out his well-known sparring with Republican Senator John McCain, calling him a loser on Twitter in 2015, and attacking him even after his death, as proof against Trump's respect for military veterans. New York Attorney General on Saturday moved to form a grand jury to investigate the death of Daniel Prude, a black man who died earlier this year after Rochester police placed a mesh pit hood over his head and held him down on the cold ground for several minutes. Prude died March 30th after he was taken off life support. The Monroe County Medical Examiner listed the manner of death as homicide caused by complications of asphyxia in the setting of physical restraint. Excited delirium and acute intoxication by PCP was contributing factors, the report said. Prude's death, after his brother called for help for his erratic behavior in March, has roiled New York's 3rd largest city since video of the encounter was made public, with protesters demanding more accountability for how it happened and legislation to change how authorities respond to mental health emergencies. A police internal affairs investigation cleared the officers involved of any wrongdoing, concluding in April that their actions and conduct displayed when dealing with Prude appeared to be appropriate and consistent with their training. Advocates say Prude's death and the actions of the 7 now suspended Rochester police officers demonstrate how police are ill-equipped to deal with people suffering mental problems. Activists have marched nightly since the police body camera footage of the encounter has been released by his family on Wednesday. Friday night's protest resulted in 11 arrests. Officers have doused activists at police headquarters with a chemical spray to drive them from barricades around the building. The following are remarks by President Trump in his press briefing on September 4th, 2020. Under Operation Legend, we've surged federal law enforcement to cities plagued by violent crime. The initiative has already resulted in tremendous success, and nationwide we have over 2,000 arrests. We don't talk about it too much, but now we might as well. So we've arrested over 2,000 criminals. They're criminals. And in a single month, murder rate in Chicago, as you know, and as I said, it was cut in half, actually. So here's more on Operation Legend from the FBI's direct website. Attorney General William P. Barr announced the launch of Operation Legend, a sustained, systematic, and coordinated law enforcement initiative across all federal law enforcement agencies working in conjunction with state and local law enforcement officials to fight the sudden surge of violent crime beginning in Kansas City, Missouri. Operation Legend was created as a result of President Trump's promise to assist America's cities that are plagued by recent violence. Operation Legend is named after 4-year-old Legend Taliaferro, who was shot and killed while he slept in his home in Kansas City, the latest in a string of violence to plague the city in recent weeks. As part of Operation Legend, Attorney General Barr directed federal agents from the FBI, U.S. Marshals Service, DEA, and ATF to surge resources to Kansas City in the coming weeks to help state and local officials fight the surge of violent crime. They will be working alongside state and local law enforcement agencies. So this operation first launched in Kansas City, but then Operation Legend expanded to Chicago and Albuquerque on July 22nd, to Cleveland, Detroit, and Milwaukee on July 29th, then to St. Louis and Memphis on August 6th, and then to Indianapolis on August 14th. The government has also allocated $78.5 million in grants to support additional police positions, hire more prosecutors, and improve technology to solve firearm crimes. The spike in violent crime, according to General Barr, may have a lot of reasons, including the pent-up aggression prompted by state and local quarantine orders, the premature release of dangerous criminals by the courts and prosecutors, and the efforts to demonetize the police and defund their work. Rather than demonetizing and defunding our police, we are supporting and strengthening our law enforcement partners at the same and local level, he finished with. Critics argue that Operation is overreach in some cases. Top law enforcement officials, including Barr and Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf, have sought to draw a distinction between Operation Legend and the federal response to unrest in Portland that was called Operation Diligent Valor, involving 114 officers from components of DHS and the U.S. Marshals Service that garnered outrage after they picked up protesters in unmarked vans without arrest warrants. 6 big city mayors, including those in Portland, Atlanta, D.C., Seattle, Chicago, and Kansas City, signed a letter to Barr and Wolf expressing deep concern about the use of federal forces and urging them to withdraw them and agree to no further unilateral deployment in our cities. Right now, if this is about solving murders in our community, we welcome that support, Lucas said in an interview Thursday. But if it's about supplanting our police department or anything remotely related to policing protest activity, then I have concerns. Lucas, the Kansas City mayor, says he believes FBI, ATF, and DEA agents could make a major impact on unsolved cases by helping investigate ballistics and criminal gangs that might be engaged in weapons trafficking rather than engaging in broad warrant sweeps. Those are the type of things that will help us in the long term change the outcome of these cases, Lucas said. But what we don't need is, let's go and pick up a bunch of people. Well, that's all for today. To read more in depth on any of these topics, see the video description below for links to sources. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to receive a daily news video update. Thank you for listening. Be relaxed, be informed, be connected.